Hey folks, welcome to the Wrench Turners Podcast, the show that's about improving the life, well-being, and productivity of mechanics everywhere. I'm your host, Mr. Joshua Taylor, founder of Wrench Turners Online. On today's show, I get to talk with a very interesting individual. He's amazing. He started as a technician, and now he's doing some very high-level diagnostics. He's the dealer technical support manager for Nissan. It's Dale Pettigrew. In today's episode of the Wrench Turners Podcast, we talked about diversity of knowledge, seek first to understand, check pins before calling Dale, and always staying curious. Let's get into it. We just jump in. So Dale, tell us how you got into automotive, good sir.
Well, I had a pretty direct path, unlike some of your other guests who had kind of an interesting stories where they started out in something completely different. But I actually straight shot right from high school. Took some automotive shop classes in high school, did well at them. And I had an instructor that was kind of a progressive guy. And this was, you got to remember, this is late 80s. So we were making the big shift between carburation and fuel injection. Mm-hmm. And he kind of saw that there was going to be a big kind of information vacuum there when guys who had been in the trade didn't know a lot about it. So he wanted to kind of arm his students going forward with a little more knowledge about fuel injection, electrical diagnosis. So he actually ran a pilot class where he got to pick about a dozen students to do that when I was in my senior year. And did well at that. The local GM dealership where I lived, they were just getting into their in-house training program, ASEP they called it, Automotive Service Education Program. Mm-hmm. And he had asked my instructor for some names from the class, from that fuel injection class, to put forward for potential enrollment. So he gave 4 or 5 names. We interviewed, we had to do aptitude testing, and then my buddy of mine actually got the job. And then a couple days later, they called me too and said, we did really well at the aptitude testing, so we'd like to hire both of you. So last exam was literally like on a Wednesday or Thursday, and started at the dealership the following Monday.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's real cool.
Yeah, straight to them. Yeah.
Cool. So, and then once you got into the dealership, what was that first year like?
Absolute chaos.
Why am I not surprised? That seems to be common. That seems to be quite common.
Yeah, there's no our education system, it just doesn't prep you right for dealership life. So auto classes, you're working on the same car for weeks, 40 minutes a day kind of thing. And then you get to the dealership and it's all of a sudden you got to have this out the door in 2 hours. And there's the variety of work is a lot different. You're not just doing basic stuff, you're all over the car doing different things and just the pace is completely different.
Yeah, it's and in automotive it's interesting, and after being in automotive for so long and now having the opportunity to spend some time turning wrenches in a power sports store, I remember when I first came into automotive, I'd work on, this is 2003 or previous. I think it was started before that. Anyway, 2003, I'd be working on 5 Caravans, 2 Dodge Rams, and maybe throw in a Neon in a day. All the same brand, roughly the same architecture, roughly the same stuff, all got 4 wheels, basically the same kind of brakes all the way around, basically. Just fairly simple in that regard in terms of concept. And what I'm trying to get at is, I spent a year and a half in a power sports store, and at 9 o'clock in the morning I could be working on a 1978 Honda CB, and an hour and a half later, after doing a cert and a quick oil change, I could be working on a 2016 Polaris 850 Sportsman.
And after 2 hours of that, I could be working on, a 1998 Triumph Speedmaster, and then I could be working on, a 15-year-old Can-Am side by side, whatever. Like we undervalue the diversity that mechanics need to learn in a day, and the large volume dealerships have even more difficulty getting their mechanics to learn all the product, because now you gotta, if you happen to be at a GM store like you're talking about, GM, GMC, Chevy, Cadillac, Buick. Yes, they have a lot of the same architecture, but they have, small changes in the things that make them work and how things go together. There's slightly different bits. You go to a larger store, or even a large a used car supercenter of some description, you could have every brand on the sun. You could have 26 different brands from the last 20-25 years or more. And there are the heavy duty folks that listen to the show. They're working on stuff not only from different brands, but from different decades and from completely different product. You've got excavators, then you have dump trucks, and then you have pumper trucks and fire trucks, and you've got skid steers and all of that. So jumping in as an apprentice day one, right out of high school, to think that you're overwhelmed day one. Wait until you get to, day 180. Wait until you get to day 1800 to think about what the kind of stuff you work on in a day is, right?
Yeah. And I actually, before that, I worked in a marine business, kind of part-time evenings and weekends and stuff. And those guys had to do, they were a dealership that sold Skidoo snow machines, and they also did marine stuff. So they'd be working on a 1975 Johnson outboard, and then they're working on a 95 Skidoo, Formula Plus kind of thing, right? And yeah, just the variety of stuff that you had to know, and it was just absolutely staggering when you walk in there as a high school student.
And then you get now. Since that first chaotic year for you, learning what we learn as mechanics coming into the business, what's happened between then and now?
For me personally?
Yeah.
So I've been around a bit. So I was at GM and for about 5 years, finished my apprenticeship. That program that they ran, that ASAP program, was kind of a condensed version. So we were in school every other 2 months. So they ran 5 sessions instead of the 3 regular school sessions, and it was every alternating 8 weeks. So we'd be back at work for 8 weeks, we'd be back at school for 8 weeks. Finished that up, got my red seal, then moved on to a couple independent facilities, did that for 2 years at one place, 2 years at a different place. It wasn't a really good fit for me, and then I got on at a Toyota dealership where I was at there. Spent about 8 years there, 7-8 years, and then moved out to Alberta to another Toyota store. Then I was a FOM at a Nissan store for about 4 years, back to turning wrenches at a Toyota store in a different town where I am now, and then got on with Nissan Canada.
So we've had this discussion, but I know it, but everybody else to hear it. You're a technical support manager, so you're for Nissan. So you're the individual that we as mechanics call in when we get to that point where we go, either I'm not making sense, or the book's not making sense, or the car's not making sense. Either way, we need to call somebody. I need an adultier adult. I need somebody who knows more about this than I do, or at least can help clarify what's going on in front of me, or give me authorization to proceed with the crazy shit that I'm about to do.
Right, yeah. So I'm actually a little bit beyond that. So what most manufacturers have like a technical call center. where if they're having issues with something, they can call somebody, an adultier adult, as you said, to help out. And then if the tech stop making progress with our technical support call center, then I get involved. So it's like a further escalation where I can provide kind of one-on-one remote support, and if necessary, I go on site to the dealerships and help them at the store.
That's awesome. So
Yeah,
you're the guy that even comes in with the golden toolbox, like, oh, this is okay. Back away. This GTR will not start, and we can't figure it out. This guy is going to get it started.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, my job is to provide support for the techs. So there's kind of there's a bit of a misconception sometimes that I'm just going to show up and fix it, and that's not my job. I'm there to help the tech fix it and teach them and help them become more sustainable in the future. So if they have something else similar that comes up in the future, they're better equipped to handle it themselves.
Oh, awesome. So it's kind of like on the job training by somebody. Okay, that's really cool. I didn't realize that the role added a level of education, and so I understood the support part, but knowing that it's like the role is to be more impactful than just figure it out. It's a figure out, maybe clarify some training, maybe, and then I'm assuming that anything that you discover in the field like that, where you actually have to make a field call, that some of that stuff gets handed back to engineering. It's like, hey, we gotta fix this, or hey, this isn't working right. These guys are not. It's not happening for them on the shop floor. We need to make some changes. Is that part of the role as well?
Yeah, kind of. There's actually kind of a separate division that deals with the engineering department to report kind of product quality or durability issues, but we do certainly have a lot of input into that. Like anytime that we see something on site, we're reporting that and getting it back to, if it looks like it's a design issue, we get it back to the engineers so they can take a look at it for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of kind of training, because showing up and just fixing the car doesn't really help the technicians that much. It's when you show up and kind of teach them the philosophy of diagnosis, the process of it. That's how they get better, right? So in the future, if they run into a similar kind of problem, they can kind of handle it themselves.
Now, how often do you get called out to a shop? In this capacity, obviously, it's been escalated to a point where it needs extra help. How often does that happen?
It goes in cycles, like everything in the automotive business. It goes in cycles. I won't get requests for a call out for sometimes weeks. I'll just deal with everything remotely, and then all of a sudden I'll get two or three in a row that are real headaches, and you just kind of have to be there, eyes on, hands on kind of thing. So it really goes in cycles. About 80% of my cases I can probably resolve remotely.
Okay,
but I
cool.
have, like our territories just changed a bit, but I've been responsible for all of Western Canada. So from Winnipeg to the West Coast to Whitehorse. So quite a large area, and about 70 different dealers that I help out. So it depends. Sometimes it's, I was in Vancouver all last week. 2 weeks before that I was out west in Saskatchewan. And then I might go weeks without having to go out on a call in person. So.
Okay. Now, you probably can't because of privacy, but can you share what one of those is, or at least what it was about?
I don't really want to get into specifics about certain cases.
Fair enough. So let's flip it from the other side, because I'm sure that you should be able to flick some education. What is a piece of education that you could perhaps instill to somebody listening that you have given or shared to technicians that you've gone on site?
Yeah, so I've always had this kind of very simple philosophy, the process of diagnosis. The first thing you want to do is just understand the system or the circuit that you're dealing with as completely as you can. And second step is ask yourself, what would happen if ... So If you understand the circuit and you start imposing questions like, what would happen if I had a short to ground here? What if I had a short power here? What if I had a poor connection here? You can kind of work out what kind of symptoms you'll get and see if it matches up to the symptom that you're experiencing. Right?
Okay.
And then the third step is eliminate the possibilities. So figure out what your possibilities could be to start with, and then just start knocking them off one by one by, circuit testing, resistance testing, all that kind of stuff. And it works for more than electrical circuits. It works for other stuff as well. But
Okay. Now, what is one of the what's one of the most common repairs that you've had to do? I don't mean specifically to car, but I mean, what is one thing that constantly comes up where technicians, it's not, you've determined that there is something wrong with the car, and maybe it's a durability or quality issue, whatever, but there's a common problem or a common mistake that a technician is making that you see regularly. Something that you could almost say that you could put a piece of paper on the wall and pin it and say, like the joke in IT is, did you turn it off and on? Like something like that. What's something so common that's almost like becomes a staple for you?
actually, terminal pin fitment is a super common one that throws a lot of technicians, because they'll have a circuit error and they'll check the circuit from the module to the sensor and everything looks good, so they assume that the circuit is okay, but there's a pin fitment issue at the module. So the module, because there's a poor connection right there, you're getting a circuit fault, but you've checked the circuit from where you can to the from the module to the sensor, and everything looks good. That throws a lot of techs for a loop. Just checking the pin fitment of those terminals is super important.
What's awesome to hear you say that. Awesome to hear you say that. And is it safe to say, if I use the phrase pin tension, we're on the same page?
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
I've had this discussion before. I didn't realize you'd say that would be a common thing. I did not expect you to say that it was common. Because going back like 13 years, back in 2010, working on Dodge Grand Caravans, and we had constant failures where we had CAN bus failures. They would go down, lights, horns, wipers, all over the place. And we spent, at that particular time, we spent a ton of time. I've recalled the story before. If you ever want to listen to it, it's back in previous episodes. But the concept is that pin tension during a heat cycle. So a caravan would be outside in the sun, absolutely baking, and it was always in the driver's D pillar. This is like a 64 pin connector, and the CAN bus pin tension would slacken. You'd lose CAN bus while it was off, and it would just start going off. We'd bring it inside, and about 15 minutes later, as soon as the left rear corner cooled off enough, it cooled off. It would just randomly stop. Knowing that was not necessarily an uncommon problem, but it was an uncommon problem for us then, and now over the years you've collected enough of them that's become a problem. So folks, those of you listening, if you suspect a circuit fault and can't find one, check your pin tension. For God's sakes, check your pin tension before you call Dale. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and the more sensitive. Obviously, CAN bus circuits are so sensitive. Any little poor connection in the circuit can completely throw off the pattern. So, yeah, super important, and that is one of the more common ones, especially with the intermittent constraints, for sure.
Awesome. Now, to that end, why Nissan? And I understand it because you started in GM, and one of the things that I found over the years is that many of us tend to stick with what we started with, or vehemently veer away from what we started with. Case in point, Russell Wickham has spent the majority of his career with GM. He has lots of gripes about GM, but because most of his career is with GM, he stays with GM. You started with GM, and now you're not. You're with Nissan. What is it that shall we say drove you to Nissan?
Yeah, so this kind of goes to the one of your later questions about, tips for technicians
Hmm.
to make sure that they're happier. Um, you have to find you have to find the scenario and the brand and everything that best aligns with you as a person. And you'll find that if you've had technicians that have tried different brands, they'll find a brand or something that really locks in with who they are, what they enjoy. I started with GM, but I never really liked the product that much. I didn't like the way they were, the way the cars were built and designed, and you got to see them do a lot of silly things. And then and with the independents, I worked on a lot of Ford and Chrysler product. Didn't really jive with them either. And then when I started working with Toyota, the Japanese imports I really kind of aligned with how they were built and designed and the durability aspect of it, and they just made sense to me. And you'll hear this from a lot of different technicians. Like Euro guys tend to really like the way that their cars are designed and built, and they're really into Euro cars and stuff. And I've just been a Japanese import guy. There's
Hmm.
no other way to kind of explain it. They make sense to me. I found them pretty easy to fix. They just make sense to me.
Interesting. I would tend to agree that some certain things speak to you, and it's
Right.
not necessarily by environment or whichever you first get into. Like I'm a Mopar guy. Like whether
Mhm.
I agree with how they're built or not, I'm a Mopar guy. Whether I own one or not, I'm a Mopar guy. I would love to. I would absolutely love to have my backside get in a Dodge Ram every day. I would love it, especially the new ones. Like they're gorgeous. They ride nice. They look nice. They have all the features and so on and so forth. And to me, they've just kind of always been the best looking truck. There's lots of folks that might disagree with me and disagree with how they're built and how they're used. Um, but at the same time, I've never owned a Dodge truck. I had, but I've had a ton of cars, and I had four neons or five neons if you count my SRT4. And once after that, it was just buying cars that fit roles, not necessarily because of
Mhm.
brand loyalty. I think if I was still fixing cars for a living full time, I'd be looking to be at a Dodge store, and not because they're easier or harder to fix. It's where I spent most of my time. But now at a power sports store, now that I get to work on everything, and I've probably worked on 12 different brands by now on motorcycles. I would happily spend my entire day just working on Triumphs, no matter whether they were old or young. And I can't put my finger on why. It's just everything seems to make sense. And I think that kind of gives it the same kind of answer to you.
Yep.
Because I haven't spent 20 years working on motorcycles, it's a more specific answer. Dodge is just because Dodge. I've just always been Dodge my entire life. But Triumph just seems I fit on them. They feel nice. The ergos fit me nice. The when I put them up on the hoist, everything comes apart the way I expect it to come apart. I don't feel I need to go get the service manager to go like, how does this come apart? It's like, oh, this comes off of here and this comes off of here and da 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 and this comes apart, and then everything actually does come apart. That's the big thing. If I work on a couple of the HD brands, they don't necessarily come apart the way you expect. And there's metric and there's standard, and you've got to put an entire gobshite full of Loctite on everything to make sure it doesn't vibrate apart. You don't have to do that with the Triumph. And I only have to use I think I probably use 12 tools when I work on a Triumph. It's about the same set of 12. So it feels right, and I think that speaks to that. Awesome. So
Yeah,
that
exactly.
leads us
They
into
just
you
make
kind of.
sense to you. Right?
Pardon?
They just align with who you are, right? They just
Exactly.
fit, right? Everything
Maybe
just
that
fits.
does that mean that I'm basically an English snob in that particular circumstance? I buy the English bike that's slightly okay.
Or you were in a
Okay, I see where
previous
that.
life, maybe. I don't know, but
Maybe, maybe. Well, you alluded to your life hack, as it were, for technicians. So what is it? What is the one piece of advice that you would suggest for technicians to be happier tomorrow?
Well, actually, we've been planning this for a while, so I've actually had some time to think, and I actually have two, if that's
Oh,
cool with you.
absolutely.
So, so yeah, the first one is find the situation that best fits with you, that best aligns with who you are as a person, and that could be the brand of the car that you're working on, how the shop is organized. If you're a really neat, tidy technician, don't go work at a complete, you know,
Hmm.
it's totally messy shop where everything's chaotic, nothing's put away. Yeah, you're going to be miserable. And the same thing if you're a Euro car guy, don't go work at a domestic diesel shop, right? It's not going to interest you. It's not going to align with who you are, and you're going to be unhappy. It's just the way it is. So find the situation that best aligns with you as a person, and you'll be much happier.
And before
And
you
the
go to
other
your
one,
second one, before you go to your second one, I wanna follow that up with a how, because this is the thing that you know right now mechanics are changing jobs every 18 to 24 months at most. That's the average, and 52% of them are. So that's good and bad all at the same time, because there's lots of statistics pro, lots of statistics con. It's really bad for leadership because now you're having to find and train new people. In that circumstance where you're trying to find something that fits as a technician, would you then suggest, like, instead of going into a dealership more specifically, and now I preach finding a leader first, but if you're suggesting that perhaps go to a dealership that has a really high volume multi-brand used car lot, that's probably a really great way to figure out what it is that you like working on the best.
yeah. So there's a couple ways around it. Most dealerships, you're going to get some exposure to a bunch of different brands. But if you see, the local Toyota store and you see a bunch of used BMWs on their lot, because that's what sells in their area, and you've got an interest in seeing what it's like to work on BMWs, that's not a bad option. The big thing is, like, do real thorough interviews of the store that you're looking to work at. So they're going to interview you, but you want to make sure that the technician interviews the shop. And networking is a really key skill that I think a lot of technicians don't take advantage of. Like, we all think, when we're in the trade, networking is for bankers and GMs and stuff like that. But it's not. Like, you can learn a lot about a shop by getting to know the technicians that work there, and they'll tell you if they're complaining all the time about the service manager or the leadership in the shop. That's the first thing you'll hear about. But get to know the other technicians that work in your area at the different shops, and you'll hear about the good ones and the bad ones. The other thing I would suggest is talk to your tool guys, because the tool guys know where the good shops and the bad shops are. They might be a little bit hesitant to really bash the bad ones, but they will give you kind of glowing reports about the good ones. Though they know where the happy guys are and where the unhappy guys are. And I say guys, I mean guys and girls. Obviously, it's we are starting to see more and more women in the trade, which is great, but not enough yet. But we're getting there. Hopefully.
It's not enough. Whilst we want to be as respectful in language as humanly possible, it's difficult after 20 plus years of, like, for example, I've been in as many dealerships and in the industry as much as I have, and talking to as many as I have. I have never worked with a female mechanic. I've been to enough shops. I've actively worked in shops where I think I told the number, worked with somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 technicians in my career, not including the coaching that I've done over the last year and a half. Just in that capacity, not a single one was female. So that statistic right now, where I think it's 96.4% of mechanics in the U.S. at least are men. So it's tough to spend that much time to go, hey guys, hey folks, this is what's going on, and it's a tough transition because you get so habitual with it. Right. What was your second piece? What was your second piece of advice?
The second piece of advice, is stay curious. So technicians by nature, I find, they're just really curious people. They like taking stuff apart and figuring how it works. And after we've been in the trade for a little while, we tend to stop being curious. We just become parts changers, the day in and day out of just get this car in, do the maintenance, kick it out kind of thing. We stop being curious about the different operations in the dealership itself if you're working at a dealership. So those slow times, every shop has times where we're not as busy. Instead of, sitting in that camp chair in your bay scrolling through social media, like go hang out in the parts department for a little while, talk to the parts manager, see what their day-to-day looks like, find out what kind of KPIs they're looking at, find out what the shop could do better to help the parts department run smoother. Go hang out in the service drive, see what your service advisors are doing during the day, talk to your service manager. If you've got any aspirations at all of moving into different roles in a shop or a dealership, talk to the service manager and find out what kind of KPIs they're looking at on a daily basis. Find out what's important to them and see what kind of things they're dealing with. Get some exposure to the business side of things, because a lot of technicians they don't get that exposure, and then they don't know what options are available to them if they choose, to stop turning wrenches, or if they have to because of, physical reasons or whatever.
Cool.
So stay curious.
Stay curious and be hungry to learn where you fit.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Everything you learn is a deposit in your self-worth bank. The more valuable you can be, the more options that you have to you, both inside the trade and outside the trade.
And that's essentially where it's led you from kind of this outside perspective. You've had your fingers in a lot of pies, as it were, that allowed you to start in GM and now to be a support role for Nissan.
Mm-hmm.
So you've taken those skills after, all these years and translate it into something where you can give back to the community. And that's really what I'm looking for. That's really what Wrench Nerds Online is, and what's entire focus is to give as much back as we possibly can to the mechanic community, so that we can better them, make them happier, healthier, better every day.
Yeah, that's right. And I learned a lot of stuff at GM that still translates to what I do now. There's things I learned with Toyota that still translate now. There are things I learned as a FOM that translate to my job now. I go in and I help dealerships just operate better.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what I do is help dealerships run smoother and kind of improve their fixed rate first time scores and CSI scores and that kind of thing. And if I hadn't had the experience with the business side of it, I wouldn't have those insights. And most of the guys who are doing my job, they've got a variety of different backgrounds. Some were trainers, some were, fixed operations managers for, other manufacturers, but they were all technicians. That's kind of the common thread we all have, is we're all technicians first.
Awesome. That's awesome to hear. Because one of the things that I hear both online and in coaching is that mechanics feel very strongly, very few feel the opposite, but most feel like there's no way out. That there's no career path, or there isn't a whole lot of vertical motion, as it were. That it's service manager is a rarity. Leadership, like big leadership, the big chair, the GM store at the GM position at the front is hyper rare. And I'm not saying that it isn't, but it happens, and it's now happening in enough that you're seeing it. So when you have, ladies and gentlemen going from the shop floor, starting pushing a broom or detailing or being a porter, and now after 25 to 30 years in the industry, they're 50 years old. You're not done at 50. But you've got 30 years of experience in the industry. You've got opportunities to become, service manager, to become fixed ops director of a group, become a GM, or become a partner of a store. I've seen it just on LinkedIn in the last year. I've seen it happen at least a half dozen times, notably of those large positions from from being a technician. So it's there if you want it, but you got to want it and you got to work for it. It's not easy either. The big thing that I think, talking to Zach Perkle a little while ago, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 260 courses for Honda that is a requirement. And then there's 64 more courses needed in class, and they're weeks at a time, and so on and so forth, just to become a master tech. So if you want to get to that level where you're directing massive amounts of people and dealing with large quantities of money and people's lives, you need to be well trained, you need to be well educated, and you need to be well versed in all aspects of the store, not just in service. But it's on us as mechanics to, it's like, if I want more than turning a wrench in 15 years, I got to start today and plant the seeds. Right? What's that adage? Yesterday, 20 years ago was the best time to plant the tree. Today's the second best time. Right? Something along those lines. So, agreed. And I appreciate that. So, yeah, Dale, I
think we should talk about more is we don't do this well in our industry. We don't do career planning for technicians typically well. The first 5 years are mapped out pretty good. You get on the quick lube bay, you change oil for a little while, and you do some tires. If you got an aptitude for that, we'll enroll you in an apprenticeship. We'll send you to school. You'll do that for a few years. You'll write your red seal, your licensed mechanic, and then
what?
Do that for 40 years, right? We don't typically plan past that for technicians, and I think
it's a rarity.
It's a rarity. There are, of course, I'm speaking in general terms. So there's some organizations and some shops that do career planning very well, and they advance their people. But I think it is, from what I've seen, it is pretty rare. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, stay curious. Get in there, talk to the service manager, learn the business side of stuff, learn parts, learn service advising, and then go talk to the sales guys. Get into the sales operations of things and find out what's going on there. Stay curious. Just learn everything you can about the business, and the opportunities will come up.
And the more you know, the more people you'll know, and the more people you know, the more opportunities will come. And once the more people,
right?
100%.
Yeah,
100%. It's a compounding effect of knowledge. As you acquire it, you acquire more knowledge of people, and the more people know the more people know that you have knowledge, the more opportunities will come, and then it becomes a circle of just growing and growing and growing. And that's, you're talking about just learning in the store, learning people, processes, and policies in the store. There's folks that reach out to me for coaching that have never read a book outside of high school. Like, these are detrimental languages that I'm hearing on a regular basis. Like, you got to start picking up. I don't care what you pick up. Like, you can pick up anything. Like, I have a whole shelf up there of leadership, empathy, emotional intelligence, business books. But I have a Court of Thorns and Roses on my bedside table that I'm reading. Like, it's two completely different. You need to be reading, and not just doing your training at school and learning, doing training tutorials online and looking for courses and YouTube videos on how to get better at the actual turning wrench job itself. But you need to expand your mind so that it becomes easier to learn the super important things to do your job. Because your brain isn't working, it's no different than going to the gym. If you're not working out the muscles, you're not able to grow the muscles or handle the weight. If you can't handle the weight, you can't learn more. So read. Even if it's for 15 minutes a day. Like, that's about all I can manage, because after 15 minutes, I'm about ready to pass out. So that's time for it's starting to become my bedtime routine. It's starting to read at night. I guess I'm getting old. Maybe I'm just getting old.
Nice.
I don't know.
Nice. Yeah.
Anyway,
and the other thing, we don't do, the technicians. They don't do enough leadership training. So a lot of times you'll have a scenario. I hear this quite a bit, where the technician, the most expensive or the most experienced technician in the shop, all of a sudden the service manager quits. So by default, you're the guy that gets that chair because you're the most experienced tech in the shop. But no leadership training, no business training, nothing. So you go from fixing cars to leading people, and you don't have the skill set. And typically it doesn't end well.
That's typically a really poor choice on leadership's side, because they're going, okay, so Johnny's got 35 years in the trade. Let's put him in the chair. Johnny's the most arrogant prick in the shop, right? Johnny's the guy that somehow turns 40 hours by Thursday. His entire Friday is somehow nothing but jam, and he leaves by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Johnny doesn't want to leave that, at least not right now. And he's also the guy that'll walk into the dispatch office and go, hey, are those 5 PDIs good to go? And walk out with all 5, and then walk back in at 6 o'clock at night and do the 5 PDIs in 2 hours. Right? That's the guy that they usually pick. So, I'm trying to help technicians learn to be better, be happier, more productive. But at the same time, you got to do your due diligence for the people who are supposedly leading you. And, there's lots of content out there to help folks be better technically. But like you said, there isn't career planning. There isn't leadership training. You're going to have to find that yourself. There are lots of folks out there that provide leadership training that you should even just dabble in. Right?
Yeah.
What are the courses that you would? Is there something that you would recommend, like a book that you'd recommend reading? It's like, hey guys, if you want to learn anything about leadership, pick up this book.
So I'll give you 2. Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. Phenomenal book about fundamentals of leadership. And the other one that I just finished on Audible, actually, because I drive a lot, so I listen to a lot of books, is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babbitt. 2 phenomenal books on leadership. Leaders Eat Last is just a really good one. It just gives you the basics of what real leadership is, and he uses a lot of examples from the military. And I was a team lead for a number of years, and that one's a really clarifying book when it talks about making sure all of your guys are taken care of and your responsibility as a leader in the shop, even though you might or might not have a title that goes with it. You can be a leader in the shop just by taking care of the other people in your circles, right?
And I think those 2 books, one of the biggest keys, both books provide a lot of examples. I really like both books because they provide real life examples of people that they've helped, consulted, coached, and they've given context to what they're very, and I think one thing to remember, in both books, they provide some very, very simple knowledge that is incredibly impactful. Even just think about the phrase in Leaders At Last itself. That is more of a metaphor, but the speaking last part. As a leader, speak last. Don't walk in a room and say, this is my, and try and paraphrase from the book, but don't walk in a room as a leader and say, this is the problem, this is what I think we should do, what do you guys think? No. Go around the room and say, hey, we're here today talking about, our Q1 profitability. What do you guys think is going on? What problems do you see? What solutions do you think we have immediately, and what can we work on going forward? Get the feedback first, then chew on it. Don't immediately respond. Chew on it in the moment, and then respond. That one for me was really impactful. I didn't realize, I knew I was doing it. I read this book when I was a GM at a collision center. I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. It's incredibly challenging for someone you're leading to be basically told what the problem is and told what you think the solution is, and then say, hey, what do you think? They have no desire to give feedback Because any feedback that you're going to present, they're going to be like, he's just going to brush it off anyway. Cool. We got deep on that one, down the rabbit hole a little bit. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, do you have any questions? Do you have, any shout-outs? Do you have anything like that?
No, not really. It was good chatting with you, and I've been enjoying the podcast. I've listened to most of your episodes now, and I enjoy what you're doing. So, thank you for letting me be a part of it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for giving us the time and giving a little bit of getting a little bit of look at what your day-to-day is like, what your story's like, and the things that you're doing to give back to the mechanic community. I really appreciate that.
No problem.
Oh no! That's the end of today's episode, wrenches. But that's okay, because there's going to be another one next week. I really hope you enjoy and subscribe. Thank you, Dale, for taking your time out of the day and spending it with us, sharing your life, your experiences, your knowledge, and your tidbits of advice. As usual, we're going to finish off this episode with a quote. Before you are a leader, success is all about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is all about growing others. Jack Welch. Remember, folks, negative pushes, positive pulls, and always clean your toys before you put them away.